I watched my son walk through my front door with birthday flowers in one hand and 47 pages of legal documents in the other. He kissed my cheek, smiled that smile I used to love, and asked me to sign away everything I owned. He brought his own lawyer to my birthday party. For 40 years, I had fed him, clothed him, worked double shifts at the fabric factory so he could finish college. He never asked where the tuition money came from. He never asked why I still used a sewing machine from 1985. He just assumed his immigrant mother was too simple to understand what she had. That was his mistake. What my son did not know, what he could never have imagined, was that the construction cranes visible from my kitchen window were building on land I had secretly owned for 8 years. He thought he was stealing from a confused old woman. He had no idea he was building his empire on my property. With my permission, every single day. And I was about to show him exactly who he was dealing with. But let me start from the beginning, from that Wednesday morning when everything changed. The morning my son came to celebrate my birthday was the same morning I realized he had already decided what to do with my life. I stood at my kitchen window with jasmine tea cooling in my hands, watching the construction cranes move across land I had owned for 8 years. The morning light caught the steel beams rising from dirt that still held my name on every deed, every permit, every mineral rights filing buried in the county recorder's office. My son had no idea. He thought he was building his empire. He was building it on mine. The Tesla appeared at 7:15 a.m., 2 hours before the birthday brunch he'd scheduled. Behind it came a black sedan with law firm plates. I touched the edge of my kitchen drawer, the bottom one that held 40 years of patience folded into paper. Derek had never opened that drawer. He'd never thought to look. I am May Hollister, 68 years old, widow of Vernon Hollister for 15 years now, mother of one son who learned English faster than kindness. And this morning, I was about to become something else entirely. The jasmine steam curled toward the ceiling as I watched Derek step out of his car. He wore the charcoal suit I'd bought him for his first real estate closing, back when he still called me on Sundays. The woman who emerged from the sedan carried a leather briefcase thick enough to hold whatever document he'd prepared to take. Everything I had. How long does it take a son to forget who fed him? Who worked double shifts at the fabric factory so he could finish college? Who never once asked for anything back? 42 years. Apparently, that's how long it takes. I set down my tea and walked to the guest bedroom where my granddaughter slept. Cora Ashford was 16, her mother's daughter in every way that mattered. She'd been staying with me since her parents' divorce turned ugly. Since her father decided Phoenix was too far from his new girlfriend in Seattle, she lay curled under the quilt I'd sewn from her baby clothes. Her dark hair spread across the pillow. "Cora," I touched her shoulder. "Wake up, Con." Her eyes opened, immediately alert. She'd inherited that from me. The ability to surface from sleep, ready for whatever came next. "Bah." She sat up, reaching for her glasses on the nightstand. "What time is it?" "Early. Your uncle is here." I pressed the old flip phone into her hands, the one I'd charged last night while she did homework. "Keep this in your blazer pocket. If I blink twice, you record. Don't stop until I blink 3 times. She turned the phone over, her thumb finding the camera button without looking. Smart girl. "What's going to happen today?" "Your uncle is going to show everyone exactly who he is." I smoothed the hair from her forehead, the same gesture I'd use when Derek was small, when he still let me touch him. I just need someone to remember it. Vernon used to say patience was just anger with better posture. I'd spent 8 years perfecting my posture, waiting for the day Derek would finally make his move. I'd hoped it wouldn't come. I'd prayed. Actually, lit incense at the altar and asked my husband's photograph if I was wrong about our son. I wasn't wrong. Cora pulled on her school blazer over her pajamas, slipping the phone into the inside pocket where it wouldn't show. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were clear. "Why does he need a lawyer for your birthday?" she asked. "That's what we're going to find out." I walked back to the kitchen, pausing at the window. The cranes had stopped moving, their operators on morning break. In 6 months, those beams would become a mixed-use development worth $12 million. Derek had filed the permits. Derek had negotiated with Apex Development Corporation. Derek had done everything except check who actually owned the 47 acres beneath his ambition. You want to know the truth about immigrant mothers? We learn to count in silence. We count the years until our children leave. We count the money we send home while pretending we have enough. We count the small betrayals, the embarrassed looks, the corrections of our English at dinner parties. And we fold each one into patience, because the alternative is a grief too large to carry. I had been counting for 42 years. This morning, the numbers finally added up. The doorbell rang. Not the polite chime of a visitor, but the long, aggressive press of someone who believed they owned what waited inside. Through the front window, I could see Derek's profile, his jaw set in the expression he wore when he was about to close a deal. Cora appeared in the hallway. Blazer buttoned, phone hidden, eyes on me. I smoothed my cardigan. Touched the jade pendant Vernon had given me on our wedding day. Took one breath, then another. Remember, I said quietly, 2 blinks. Then I walked toward the sound of my son's impatience, toward the flowers and documents and whatever lie he'd prepared to explain why he needed my signature on my birthday. The construction cranes stood frozen against the morning sky, waiting. I had been waiting longer. I opened the door, and my son kissed my cheek with flowers in one hand and 47 pages of betrayal in the other. Happy birthday, Mom! Derek Hollister, 42 years old and wearing ambition like cologne, stepped past me into the living room. Behind him came his wife, Paige, 39. Arranging a bakery cake box with the precision of the interior designer she'd been before marriage made her a professional hostess. Her coral manicure caught the light as she avoided meeting my eyes. The third person through my door was not family. Bradley Mercer stood by the entrance with a leather briefcase that held more legal weight than birthday wishes. Derek's corporate attorney had the smooth face of a man paid to make problems disappear. And this morning, I understood that I was the problem. "This is Bradley," Derek said, gesturing as if introducing a caterer. "He's been helping me with some estate planning." I thought, since we're all here, we could take care of some paperwork. Paige set the cake on my dining table. Cora appeared in the hallway, blazer buttoned, and I gave her a small nod. She drifted to the corner of the room, invisible the way teenagers can be when adults are performing. Derek placed the document stack on my coffee table. The cover page read, "Durable Power of Attorney," in letters bold enough to announce their own importance. "We thought, since you're getting older, it would make everyone feel better if we had the paperwork in order," he said. His smile was the same one he'd used at 7 years old when he'd broken my porcelain teapot and blamed the cat. "This is just to protect you, Mom, in case anything happens." 47 pages. My son had spent 47 pages finding ways to own everything I had spent 40 years building. I picked up the document and felt its weight, the heft of preparation, the months of planning that had gone into this single morning ambush. "Of course I'll sign, son." I settled into my reading chair, the one Vernon had bought me when his back got too bad for him to sit beside me on the sofa. "But let me read it first. You know your mother. I like to understand what I'm agreeing to." Derek's jaw tightened, but he recovered. "Take your time." I read. The room filled with the sounds of Paige unwrapping the cake, of the lawyer checking his watch, of my son's foot tapping against my hardwood floor. I read past the standard clauses about bill paying and medical decisions. I read past the sections granting authority over bank accounts and investment portfolios. I stopped at Clause 7.3. Authority over all corporate entities, partnerships, and LLC structures in which the principal holds ownership interest, including but not limited to the power to dissolve, transfer, or restructure said entities. 3 numbers. Clause 7.3. 3 numbers that meant Derek could dissolve Lotus Land Holdings with my own signature. He could transfer my ownership of the land beneath his construction project. He could restructure everything Vernon and I had built into something that belonged only to him. My hands did not shake. I had spent too many years learning not to shake. "This is very thorough," I said, turning another page. "Bradley must have worked hard on this." The lawyer smiled the smile of a man who billed $400 an hour. "We wanted to make sure your interests were fully protected, Mrs. Hollister." My interests. He meant my son's interests. He meant the land Derek thought was his. The permits Derek thought were clean. The development Derek thought would make him rich. He didn't know what I knew. None of them did. The medical portions. I pointed to Section 4, where the language turned to healthcare proxies and end-of-life decisions. I should really discuss these with Dr. Reeves before I sign anything about my healthcare. You understand. Derek's eyes flickered to his lawyer. Just for a moment. Just long enough. Of course, Mom. His voice stayed steady, but I heard the crack beneath it. Take all the time you need. I had learned to smile through worse. I had smiled through customs officers who couldn't pronounce my name, through landlords who charged me double deposits, through PTA mothers who spoke slowly as if my accent meant I couldn't understand. I could smile through my own son. Thank you for understanding. Con. I used the Vietnamese endearment deliberately, watching him flinch at the reminder of what language he'd refused to learn. I'll call Dr. Reeves this week. We can sign everything properly once I've had time to review. Paige cut the cake. Derek ate a slice without tasting it. Bradley Mercer made small talk about the weather while his eyes kept returning to the unsigned documents on my coffee table. They left at 11, taking the flowers and the forced smiles with them. The POA stayed behind. 47 pages of evidence sitting exactly where my son had placed them. Cora emerged from her corner. But what just happened? Your uncle came to take what isn't his. I picked up the document, feeling its weight again. But he doesn't know what his father left me. And he certainly doesn't know that everything he's built for the past 2 years is standing on ground I already own. The construction cranes were visible through my kitchen window. They would keep building, and I would keep waiting. After Cora went to her room, I took the documents to my bedroom and closed the door. I spread the 47 pages across the quilt Vernon and I had bought our first year in America. The one with the faded roses he'd picked because it reminded him of his mother's garden in Saigon. I read the way Vernon had taught me to read legal papers, slowly, with a pencil, marking every word I didn't understand and every word I understood too well. My sewing pens held the pages open while I worked through the numbered clauses, the subsections, the language designed to sound protective while granting total control. Clause 4.2 covered healthcare decisions. Clause 5.1 addressed financial accounts. Clause 6.8 dealt with real property transactions. Clause 7.3 was where they hid the knife. Financial agents shall have authority to execute, modify, or terminate any real property holdings, trusts, or corporate entities held in the principal's name, including, but not limited to, the dissolution or restructuring of limited liability companies. Corporate entities. 3 words that would have let him dissolve everything Vernon died protecting. 3 words that would transfer Lotus Land Holdings into Derek's name with nothing but my signature and a notary stamp. I heard voices through the thin bedroom door. Derek and Paige had not left. They were waiting in my living room, probably eating the birthday cake I hadn't touched. She doesn't understand half these documents anyway. Derek's voice carried the confidence of a man who had never been wrong. We'll have the signatures by Friday. Are you sure about this? Paige sounded uncertain, but not uncertain enough to stop him. She seemed pretty sharp when she was reading. She's always been like this, needs everything explained twice. That's why we need the POA before she gets worse. Dad should have done this years ago. I pressed my palm flat against the door, feeling the vibration of my son's voice through the wood. He was explaining to his wife why I was too stupid to understand what he was stealing. He was using my accent, my careful English, my lifetime of pretending not to notice insults as evidence that I was declining. Vernon's rule echoed in my memory. Never let them know how much you understand. I had played this role before. I had played it with the banker who tried to charge us 3 points above market on our first mortgage. I had played it with the supplier who thought he could overcharge the fabric factory because the owner's wife couldn't read invoices. I had played it every time someone looked at my face and heard my accent and decided I was simple. I opened the bedroom door. Derek stood immediately, smoothing his suit jacket. Paige froze with a forkful of cake halfway to her mouth. Son, I let my voice waver just slightly. I let my eyes look tired. I need a few more days. My English isn't good enough for all these legal words. You understand, don't you? Derek's smile spread like oil on water. Of course. Mom, take your time. Maybe you can explain to me the parts about the company things. I touched clause 7.3 with my finger, watching his face. This word here, corporate entities. What does this mean? He didn't flinch. He had practiced this. It just means I can help manage things if you need me to. Pay bills, handle paperwork. Nothing you need to worry about. You want to know the secret immigrant mothers learn? When they think you don't understand, they tell you everything. They explain their plans in simple words because they believe simple words are all you can follow. And while they're explaining, they're confessing. That sounds good, I said. But maybe I should ask someone to help me read Dr. Reeves, or maybe a lawyer friend. The smile flickered, just for a moment. You don't need to pay a lawyer, Mom. That's what family is for. Yes, family. I nodded like I was agreeing, like I was grateful. Just a few more days, to read slowly. You know your mother. Paige set down her fork. Derek checked his watch. The lawyer's briefcase sat by the door, still waiting for signatures that would not come today. We should let you rest, Derek said finally. I'll call you Thursday. We can go over anything you don't understand. I walked them to the door. I accepted Derek's kiss on my cheek. I waved as the Tesla pulled away, the lawyer's sedan following close behind. Cora appeared at my elbow. Bah, are you okay? I'm fine, Con. I watched the cars disappear down the road, past the construction cranes that had stopped for the day. Your uncle thinks I'm confused. Are you? I smiled. No, but he doesn't need to know that yet. Derek thought he was being patient. He thought he was giving his declining mother time to accept what she couldn't prevent. He didn't know I had already read every word, marked every trap, and memorized the exact clause that would let him erase my company with my own signature. He thought I was asking for time because I was confused. I was asking for time because I needed to make one phone call. The taillights of Derek's Tesla disappeared down the road, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. Cora had gone to bed an hour ago. The house was mine again. I retrieved the phone from its hiding place behind the rice cooker. Not the old flip phone I'd given Cora. This was the smartphone Linnea had pressed into my hand 6 months ago. The one registered under her paralegal's name. The one Derek didn't know existed. Linnea Yates answered on the first ring despite the late hour. 35 years old. Stanford law trained. And the daughter of my oldest friend from the fabric factory days. Her mother had died the same year as Vernon, and somewhere in that shared grief, Linnea had become the lawyer I never knew I needed. Auntie, her voice was calm, but I heard the tension beneath it. I've been waiting for your call. We have 54 hours. His escrow closes Friday at 5. You already know. I have a contact at his firm. She confirmed the timeline this afternoon. Linnea paused. Derek's been planning this for months. The POA is just the final piece. I sat at my kitchen table, the construction cranes visible through the window, their lights blinking against the dark sky. Tell me the strategy. Counter POA. We draft your own power of attorney document, but instead of giving control to Derek, it transfers everything into an irrevocable trust. Cora as beneficiary, me as trustee. Her voice steadied into the rhythm of a lawyer explaining a case. Once you sign it and we file, his POA controls nothing but an empty name. The assets will already be protected. How do you explain to a Stanford lawyer that your husband taught you more about contracts than any law school ever could? Vernon had made me read every document twice before signing. He had taught me to look for the clause that didn't match the promise. The word that shifted meaning in the small print. The LLC, I said. He wants Lotus Land Holdings. I know. Your husband registered it using the Vietnamese spelling of your maiden name. Derek's investigator found the decoy you created 2 years ago. He thinks the real company is dormant. Linnea's voice carried something like admiration. Auntie, how long have you been preparing for this? Since the day Derek stopped calling me on Sundays. Silence on the line. Then, there's one more thing. I need to know about the envelope your husband left, the sealed one. I looked toward my bedroom, where the nightstand held what Vernon had left behind. I haven't opened it. Tonight might be the night. We ended the call at midnight. I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum and the distant sound of highway traffic. Then I walked to my bedroom. Vernon smiled from the wedding photograph on the nightstand. The same quiet smile he wore 35 years ago when he told me nobody ever looks twice at a woman with a sewing machine. The envelope sat beside the frame, yellowed now, sealed with tape he had placed there himself. The envelope had sat in that drawer for 3 years. Vernon had known I would need it. He just hadn't known when. I broke the seal. Inside a single sheet of paper and a legal document. The paper was covered in Vernon's handwriting, Vietnamese characters flowing across the page like water. The document was a deed transfer dated 6 months before his death. The mineral rights to all 47 acres, transferred to my name alone. Filed quietly with the county recorder while Derek was closing his first real estate deal, too busy to notice his father's final act of protection. I read Vernon's note slowly, hearing his voice in every word. Em ơi, anh biết con mình sẽ làm gì. Anh đã lo cho em từ lúc anh còn lo được. My love, I knew what our son would do. I protected you while I still could. The tears came then. Not the tears I had cried at his funeral, surrounded by people who expected grief. These were private tears, the kind you save for when no one is watching. Vernon had seen our son clearly, had understood what Derek was becoming even when I still hoped. At the bottom of the note, in English, "This land is yours, not his. Never forget that." Vernon had built me a fortress out of paper and foresight, and I had been sleeping inside it without knowing. The mineral rights alone were worth more than Derek's entire development. The land he thought he was building on belonged to the mother he planned to betray. I read the note 3 times, then pressed it against my chest. He had written it in Vietnamese, so Derek could never understand it, even if he found it. My husband had known our son would try to take everything, and he had spent his final year making sure I would never have to fight alone. I took a photograph of the deed with Linnea's phone, attached it to a message, typed one line, "This is what you needed." The send button glowed blue in the darkness. I pressed it. Outside, the construction cranes stood frozen against the night sky, building something on ground that had been mine all along. Linnea's reply came at 6 a.m. "This changes everything. Meeting with my team in an hour. Stay ready." I was making tea when the second text arrived. This one was from the last person I expected. "Can we meet without Derek, please? Paige." I stared at the screen for a long moment. In 12 years of marriage to my son, Paige had never asked to see me alone. We had shared Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas mornings, and the occasional awkward lunch where she corrected my pronunciation of quinoa. We had never shared a conversation without Derek orchestrating it. I typed back, "Does it Bloom Coffee House, 8 a.m. The coffee shop sat on the corner of a strip mall in Surprise, far enough from Derek's usual routes that we wouldn't be seen. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a booth facing the door. Paige walked in at exactly 8, her coral manicure wrapped around a leather purse that cost more than my first car. She ordered a latte she didn't drink and sat across from me with her hands pressed flat on the table like she was bracing for impact. "Mom!" She never called me that unless Derek was listening, but here she was, using it anyway. I don't know everything that's happening, but I know Derek has been making decisions about that land without telling me. I sipped my tea, waited. He's been on the phone constantly, late nights, locked in his office. She looked down at her untouched coffee. He told me the birthday visit was about family, but I saw the lawyer's briefcase. I saw how thick those documents were. 12 years of Thanksgiving dinners where Paige corrected my English, and now she sat across from me asking questions. 12 years of being the mother-in-law she tolerated, and now her eyes held something I had never seen there before. Doubt. "I just need to know," she said quietly. "Are you okay? Really okay?" The question hung between us like smoke. I could have told her everything. I could have explained the POA, the clause that would have stripped me of my company, the land her husband thought he controlled. I could have shown her Vernon's letter, the mineral rights, the counter-strategy Linnea was preparing. But Paige was still Derek's wife, and I had learned long ago that trust must be earned in small steps. "I'm fine, dear." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "But thank you for asking." It's been a long time since anyone in this family asked me that. Her fingers trembled under mine. She was scared of something, but I wasn't sure yet if she was scared for me or for herself. When did my daughter-in-law become another woman my son was lying to? When had Derek decided that keeping secrets from his wife was the same as keeping them from me? The land, Paige said slowly. Derek says it's worth millions. He says the Apex deal will change everything for us. She looked up. But he won't tell me details. He says I don't need to worry about the business side. Do you believe him? She didn't answer. That was answer enough. I let the silence stretch. Outside, the morning traffic hummed past. A mother pushed a stroller by the window. The coffee shop filled with the ordinary sounds of people living ordinary lives. Can I ask you something, Paige? I kept my voice light, curious. Do you have your own bank account, just yours? Her eyes widened. We have joint accounts. Derek handles the finances. She paused. Why? No reason. I smiled the same smile I had given the banker who tried to overcharge us 30 years ago. Just asking. My mother always told me a woman should have money her husband doesn't know about. Old-fashioned thinking, I suppose. Paige stared at me. Something shifted behind her eyes. A calculation she hadn't made before. I should go, she said finally. Derek thinks I'm at yoga. She stood, gathered her purse, then paused. Mom, whatever's happening with those documents, whatever Derek is trying to do, I want you to know I didn't know about it. Not really. I believe you. She nodded once and walked out. I watched through the window as she climbed into her Range Rover, sat for a moment without starting the engine, then finally drove away. I had planted a seed in ground I didn't know was already cracking. Whether it would grow into alliance or just another form of silence, I couldn't yet say. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize, but the message made clear who had sent it. Mom, it's Derek. New number. I want you to see the project. My office, 3 p.m. today. Bring Cora. I think it's time you understood what we're building. I smiled at the screen. He wanted to show me his empire. He wanted to impress the mother he thought too simple to understand blueprints and zoning permits and development deals. He was about to show me exactly what he had built on my land. I texted Linnea, office tour at 3. Cora will have the phone ready. Her reply came in seconds. Perfect. Let him talk. Every word is evidence. The elevator opened to a wall-sized render of Sunrise Ridge. 120 luxury condos rising from land I had bought for $47,000 in 2009. Derek stood beside me, beaming like a child showing off a school project. Cora trailed behind us, her blazer pocket angled toward her uncle, the phone inside already recording. This is it, Mom. Derek swept his arm toward the architectural model in the center of the room. Sunrise Ridge. The biggest project I've ever built. The office smelled of new leather and expensive coffee. Glass walls overlooked downtown Phoenix, and beyond them, I could see the construction cranes moving across the horizon. My cranes. My land. My son had no idea. Come, let me show you the details. He guided me to a table covered with blueprints and investor packets. His hand on my elbow was gentle, the touch of a son who believed he was impressing his aging mother. ROI projection is 340%. Apex Development Corp is ready to close Friday. I picked up one of the investor packets. The address printed on the cover made my heart freeze for exactly 1 beat 47. Sunrise Ridge Parcels, Phoenix, Arizona. 47 Sunrise Ridge, the same address on the deed sitting in my kitchen drawer. The same parcels Vernon and I had purchased when Derek was still closing small deals and learning to spell escrow. Very impressive, son. I set down the packet with steady hands. You've worked so hard. Derek smiled the smile of a man who believed he had already won. He walked me through the 3D model, pointing out the rooftop pool, the underground parking, the retail space on the ground floor. He showed me projections and timelines and partnership agreements with Apex. He spoke about zoning variances and permit expediting and the relationships he'd built with city council members. He never once mentioned who owned the ground beneath all his ambition. Cora moved quietly around the office, pausing at windows, examining blueprints, her phone capturing everything. She had learned well. She was invisible in the way teenagers can be when adults are too busy performing to notice. The mineral rights alone are worth a fortune, Derek said, tapping a geological survey on his desk. Once the highway interchange goes in next year, we're looking at additional revenue streams Dad never even imagined. How do you watch your son show off the empire he built on ground you've owned since before he broke ground? How do you smile and nod while he explains how much money he'll make from land that was never his to develop? I walked to the window. The construction site spread below us, steel and concrete rising in the afternoon sun. Workers in hard hats moved like ants across the dirt, building something beautiful on a foundation of theft. How long have you been building on this land, son? Derek joined me at the window, his reflection overlapping mine in the glass. Almost 2 years. Mom, why do you ask? No reason. I kept my voice light. Curious. Just wondering. It's come so far. It has. Pride filled his voice. Dad would have loved to see this. He always said real estate was the smart money. Vernon would have loved many things. He would have loved watching me stand here, holding evidence of our son's betrayal, while Derek explained exactly how he planned to profit from it. He would have loved knowing that every word spoken in this glass tower was being recorded by his own granddaughter. 2 years. My son had been building on my land for 2 years, and he had never once thought to check who actually owned it. He had assumed, he had presumed. He had built an empire on the certainty that his mother was too simple to understand property law. We should get you home before traffic gets bad. Derek checked his watch. I'll have Bradley send over the paperwork tomorrow. We can sign everything Friday morning, and then you can watch the closing from right here. Front row seat to history. That sounds lovely, son. He walked me to the elevator, his hand warm on my shoulder, already talking about champagne toasts and family celebrations. He didn't notice Cora slip her phone back into her pocket. He didn't see the look that passed between us as the elevator doors opened. And he certainly didn't understand that every word he'd spoken in that office would be used to prove he knew exactly whose land he was building on. The elevator descended 12 floors in silence. Cora stood beside me, her face carefully blank, her pocket heavy with evidence. Bah, she whispered as we crossed the lobby. Did you get what you needed? More than enough. Outside. The Phoenix sun hit my face like a blessing. I looked back at the glass tower where my son sat planning his Friday triumph, and I allowed myself one small smile. He thought he was showing me his empire. He had shown me exactly how to take it apart. I didn't learn what happened that Thursday night until months later, when Paige called me from a number I didn't recognize and told me everything. But the story belongs here, in the sequence of falling dominoes. Because while I was home reviewing Cora's recording, my daughter-in-law was making discoveries of her own. Paige had spent 11 years believing her husband told her everything. That Thursday night, while padding barefoot toward the kitchen for chamomile tea, she learned the difference between a man who shares and a man who simply talks. Derek's study door was open 6 inches. Blue light from his computer screen leaked into the hallway, and his voice carried clearly through the gap. The widow doesn't suspect anything. Ice clinked in his whiskey glass. She thinks I'm doing her a favor. Sign the option without reading past page 2. Paige froze in the hallway, her hand braced against the doorframe. My wife doesn't need to know the specifics. Derek continued. She thinks I'm helping the old woman, and that's exactly what I want her to think. Lotus Land Holdings will handle the transfer, completely untraceable back to me. Paige had asked Derek once, during their first year of marriage, whether he'd ever lie to her. He'd kissed her forehead and said, "Only to protect you." She'd found it romantic then. 11 years later, hiding in their hallway, she understood what he'd actually been promising. She retreated silently to the bedroom, tea forgotten. The heated marble floors made no sound under her bare feet. She lay in bed with her eyes closed until Derek finished his call, finished his bourbon, and finally fell asleep beside her. At midnight, Paige took her laptop to the guest bathroom. The Secretary of State website loaded slowly on her phone's hotspot. She typed Lotus Land Holdings, LLC, Arizona into the search bar and waited. The result appeared in seconds. Status active. Derek had told her the deal fell through months ago. Derek had told her the LLC was defunct. Derek had told her so many things. I didn't know any of this that Thursday night. I was home in Phoenix, reviewing Cora's recording for the third time, thinking I'd won. But 40 miles away in Scottsdale, a woman I'd dismissed as complicit was becoming the ally I never expected. Paige cross-referenced the LLC registration. The formation documents listed an address I would have recognized immediately, my maiden name, spelled in the Vietnamese transliteration Vernon had used when we registered the company together. Paige didn't know the significance, but she knew enough to keep digging. She searched my name next. The county assessor records confirmed what Derek had never told her. The land he called worthless scrubland was 47 acres, bordering a proposed highway interchange. The same land his development company had been building on for 2 years. Her wedding ring caught the bathroom nightlight as she typed. Through the wall, she could hear Derek snoring, oblivious to the woman he'd married finally looking at him clearly. Paige screenshot everything, sent the images to her personal email, the one Derek didn't monitor. Then she sat on the bathroom floor and stared at her reflection in the mirror. She'd believed, truly believed, that she was different from the women Derek's colleagues married, the silent wives who pretended not to see. Now Paige understood she hadn't been different. She'd simply been better deceived. At 2:17 a.m., she retrieved a business card from the back of her jewelry box. Her sister had given it to her 3 years ago, during a Christmas visit when Paige had mentioned that Derek seemed distant. Just in case, her sister had said. Paige had tucked the card away and forgotten it existed. Now she typed the number into her phone. The text was simple. This is Paige Hollister. My sister gave me your card. I need to speak with you about my options. Please call me at this number only. She pressed send before she could change her mind. The bathroom was cold. The house was silent. Somewhere in the master bedroom. Derek slept the sleep of a man who believed all his secrets were safe. Paige didn't know my name yet. Didn't know that 42 years ago. I'd carried her husband as a newborn while Vernon worked double shifts at the factory. Didn't know that I'd spent 3 decades watching my son become someone I didn't recognize, hoping each year that he'd prove me wrong. But by Thursday at 2:17 in the morning, she and I were connected by the same thread. We were both women Derek Hollister had underestimated. And in my experience, that's the most dangerous thing a man can do. I learned all of this later, sitting across from Paige at the same coffee shop where she'd asked me about separate bank accounts. She showed me the screenshots on her phone, the text to her lawyer, the moment-by-moment reconstruction of a marriage collapsing in a guest bathroom. I should have seen it sooner, she said. You saw it when you needed to, I told her. That's what matters. But on that Thursday night, I knew nothing of Paige's awakening. I was home in Phoenix, lying awake in the dark, thinking about 40 years of sacrifice and the son who had learned nothing from any of it. While Paige sat in a guest bathroom 40 miles away, I sat in my kitchen, watching the same moon through a different window. Neither of us knew the other was awake. Neither of us knew we were fighting the same war. The tea had gone cold an hour ago, but I couldn't make myself move from that kitchen chair. The refrigerator hummed its steady rhythm. Through the cracked window, jasmine from my garden drifted in with the November air. I traced a finger over the photograph held to the refrigerator by a magnet from Derek's high school graduation. In it, I was 26, holding him as an infant, standing in the doorway of our first American apartment. My eyes in that photograph had already learned to hide. 40 years ago. I had arrived in this country with Vernon, 2 suitcases, and enough English to order coffee. I had learned the rest in silence, how to cook American breakfast while missing the taste of home. How to smile when Vernon's colleagues spoke slowly because they assumed I couldn't understand. How to nod when his mother called my pho that smelly soup and suggested I learn to make casseroles. Vernon's mother once told me my accent made the children embarrassed. I smiled. I always smiled. What she didn't know was that I was watching, learning, remembering every slight and storing it in a place she would never think to look. They mistook my quiet for weakness. 40 years I let them. The construction cranes blinked in the distance, their red lights steady against the black sky. My land. My son building his dreams on ground I had purchased while he was still learning to pronounce escrow. He had never asked who owned the parcels beneath his foundation. He had assumed. That was the difference between us. Cora was asleep in the guest room, her phone charged and ready. Tomorrow she would go to school and pretend everything was normal. Tomorrow I would pretend to be confused about documents I had already memorized. We were both learning the same lesson. A woman who waits is not a woman who surrenders. How do you explain to your granddaughter that the woman pouring her cereal spent 4 decades learning to be invisible on purpose?
How?
Do you teach her that silence isn't submission when the world tells her speaking up is strength? My phone buzzed on the counter. Linnea's name glowed in the darkness. Auntie, her voice was quiet but urgent. I have news. I pressed the phone to my ear and waited. My paralegal has a contact at the county recorder's office. She pulled Derek's investigation file from 3 months ago. Linnea paused. He hired a private investigator. Spent $8,000 trying to find out what you own. And what did he find? Lotus Land Holdings, LLC. Inactive. Filed under the Wade Giles spelling of your maiden name. I heard the smile in her voice. His investigator closed the file in February, marked it dormant. He thinks you're defenseless. The decoy. The shell company I had registered 2 years ago using the old transliteration. The one no official Vietnamese document would ever use. I had filed it specifically to be found, specifically to be dismissed. I've been defenseless my whole life, I said. It's the only trick I know. He built his whole case on a shell you planted, Auntie. His entire fraud claim rests on evidence you fabricated. When this goes to court, it collapses on day 1. For the first time in 54 hours. I laughed. It echoed in that empty kitchen like something I had forgotten I owned. Derek had spent $8,000 confirming that I was helpless. His own investigator had validated the trap I set before he ever decided to spring it. The counterpoint is ready, Linnea continued. Dorothy Winslow confirmed she'll be available tomorrow morning as notary. We can file everything by 10 a.m. Dorothy Winslow, my neighbor of 16 years. A retired county clerk who kept her notary license active for exactly this kind of moment. Another woman Derek had overlooked. Another piece of a plan he never saw coming. There's one more thing. Linnea's voice changed, softer now. Vernon's estate file. The sealed portion. My paralegal finally got a judge to unseal it. My heart stopped. May, your husband left instructions none of us knew about. Documents he filed 3 months before he died. I don't know what's in them yet, but I'm driving them to you first thing tomorrow. Vernon. Even now, even after 15 years in the ground, he was still protecting me, still planning, still 3 steps ahead of the son who had inherited none of his patience. What time? 7 a.m., before Derek wakes up. I ended the call and sat in the darkness, listening to the refrigerator hum. The photograph on the door showed a young mother holding a baby she didn't yet know would betray her. But the woman in that photograph had also been planning, even then, learning to be invisible, learning to wait. Tomorrow, Vernon would speak to me from beyond the grave, and Derek would learn what 40 years of patience looked like when it finally moved. Linnea arrived at 7 with Vernon's documents tucked in her briefcase. We had exactly 1 hour to review them before the world changed again. Derek didn't knock. He never had. But that Friday morning, he nearly took the screen door off its hinges. His Mercedes had skidded into my gravel driveway at 8 a.m., door slamming before the engine died. Now he stood in my kitchen, waving papers from Apex's title company, his suit wrinkled like he'd slept in his car. There's a problem. His voice cracked on the word. A cloud on the title. Some LLC filed liens on all 47 parcels. The sale can't close until it's cleared. I sipped my tea. Cora sat at the kitchen table with her cereal, watching. This deal closes in 22 hours or I lose everything. Derek slammed the papers on the counter. Sign the POA now. My lawyer can dissolve whatever shell company filed these liens by noon. Slow down. I set my mug on the table with deliberate care. Who owns the LLC that filed the lien? Some shell company. Doesn't matter. Bradley's already running the registration. And what did he find? Derek paused. For the first time since he'd burst through my door, uncertainty flickered across his face. He's still looking. The filing uses some old transliteration. Vietnamese, maybe. Hard to trace. You want to know what 40 years of silence buys you? The patience to watch your own son dig his grave, one shovel at a time. The discipline to sip tea while he panics. The control to wait for exactly the right moment. I picked up my phone. What are you doing? Derek stepped toward me, calling someone who can help. I pressed Linnea's number and switched to speaker. The phone crackled once before she answered. Auntie, I'm still in the driveway. Is everything okay? My son has questions about an LLC, the one blocking his title. I kept my voice calm. Can you read him the registration? A pause. Papers rustling. Derek stood frozen in my kitchen, his eyes darting between me and the phone. Lotus Land Holdings, LLC, Linnea read. Filed with the Arizona Corporation Commission in 2017. Current status, active. The registered agent, I said. Read that part. Registered agent May T. Hollister. Address 4712 Dusty Creek Road, Phoenix, Arizona. The kitchen went silent. Cora's cereal spoon hung suspended halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide as she watched her uncle's face shift from confusion to comprehension to horror. That's this house. Derek. I set down my phone. I filed that LLC 8 years ago, 2 years before you broke ground on your first parcel. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The word came out strangled. You planned this. I planned for something. I didn't know it would be you. I stood from the table and walked to the window where the construction cranes were visible on the horizon. Vernon and I bought that land in 2009. We registered the holding company together. After he died, I transferred the mineral rights into my name alone. The mineral rights. Derek's voice was barely a whisper. Worth more than your condos, actually. The highway interchange goes in next year. But you knew that. That's why you wanted my signature so badly. I'd spent decades being the woman no one saw coming, the immigrant mother with the accent, the widow with the sewing machine, the old woman who needed documents explained twice. Now Derek saw me, and wished he hadn't. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and what little color remained drained from his face. That's Apex's legal team, he whispered. They're pulling out of the deal. Of course they are. I returned to my seat. Title clouds make investors nervous. Aspartating when the cloud belongs to the woman whose signature they thought they were buying. Cora set down her spoon. Linnea's voice came through the speaker. Should I come inside now, Auntie? Yes, and bring the other document, the sealed one. Derek's head snapped up. What other document? The front door opened. Linnea walked in carrying a manila envelope, the kind lawyers use for things that matter. She set it on the kitchen table between me and my son. Your father left this, I said. Sealed it 3 months before he died. Had it filed with the court to be opened only when you made your move on the land. Derek stared at the envelope. His name was written across the front in Vernon's careful handwriting. He knew, Derek said quietly. Dad knew I would do this. He knew everything. I touched the envelope but didn't open it yet. He just hoped he was wrong. The construction cranes stood motionless against the morning sky. Somewhere in Scottsdale. Paige was waking up with screenshots on her phone and a divorce attorney's number in her messages. Somewhere in downtown Phoenix. Apex's lawyers were drafting withdrawal notices. And here in my kitchen. Vernon Hollister was about to speak to his son one final time. Should I read it? Linnea asked. I looked at Derek. At the son I had carried and fed and worked double shifts to educate. At the man who had decided my life was something he could claim. No, I said. He should. Derek's hands trembled as he set down Vernon's letter. Whatever his father had written, it had stripped something from him. But I wasn't finished. I picked up the pen exactly as Derek expected. But the document beneath it was nothing he'd prepared. You wanted me to sign something, I said. I'm signing. Linnea slid a document across the table. Not the POA Derek had brought on my birthday. Not the 47 pages designed to strip me of everything. This was a counterpo, prepared by my lawyer, transferring all assets into an irrevocable trust with Cora as beneficiary. That's not, Derek stepped forward. Mother, that document isn't the one we discussed. No, it's better. Dorothy Winslow stepped through my back door as if she'd been waiting for her cue. She had been. My neighbor of 16 years, a retired county clerk who kept her notary license active for exactly moments like this. She carried her stamp and seal like a woman who understood the weight of paperwork. Dorothy, I gestured to the table. If you would. Derek's face cycled through confusion, realization, and finally something close to fear. Watching him read that counterpo was like watching a man realize the door he'd been pushing was always meant to be pulled. You can't do this, his voice cracked. This is coercion, undue influence. I'll have it thrown out. On what grounds? Linnea's voice was calm. Your mother is of sound mind. Represented by counsel. Signing documents in her own home with an independent notary. There's nothing undue about it. I signed my name with one deliberate stroke. Dorothy's stamp clicked against the paper, and just like that, everything Derek had planned for became legally untouchable. Signed, witnessed, and notarized, Dorothy announced. This is now the controlling legal instrument. Derek's jaw worked. No sound came out. Before I tell you what happened next. Before my granddaughter showed Derek what she'd been recording. I need to ask, do you think he fought back or finally broke? Drop your guess in one sentence. A quick note. The next part includes some recreated details to deepen the emotional impact. The lesson behind it is what matters. I'll sue. Derek found his voice, ugly with desperation. Elder abuse, financial manipulation. I'll tie this up in court for years. Will you? I remained in my chair, hands folded. With what evidence? Evidence. He laughed, but the sound was hollow. I have witnesses. Paige, Bradley. They'll testify you've been declining for months. Uncle Derek. Cora's voice cut through the room. She stepped forward from the kitchen doorway. Her school blazer buttoned, her phone held in front of her like a shield. I recorded everything. Derek froze. Wednesday at Mom's house. When you told her the POA was just to protect Grandma. Cora's hands trembled, but her voice didn't waver. Thursday at your office, when you showed us the blueprints and said how much money you'd make once the deal closed. I have it all. 16 years old and steadier than her uncle had ever been. I had raised her mother to be kind. I had prayed her daughter would also be brave. That morning, Cora was both. You little. Derek stopped himself, glancing at Linnea and Dorothy. He understood finally that every word from this moment forward would be used against him. Would you like to hear the recording, Derek? Linnea pulled out her own phone. We've already made copies. With your voice, explaining how your mother doesn't understand documents. Your voice, laughing about how easy this would be. That's inadmissible. But the fight was draining from him. In a criminal proceeding, perhaps. But in civil court, in a competency hearing where you're claiming I manipulated your grandmother. Linnea smiled. Your own words prove she was the one being manipulated. By you. Derek backed toward the door. His face had gone gray. All the confidence of Wednesday's ambush stripped away. You raise a child to be kind. You pray they're also brave. That morning, my granddaughter stood in my kitchen and showed me she was both. And my son stood in my kitchen and showed me he was neither. This isn't over, Derek said. But we all knew it was. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. And whatever color remained drained from his face. That's Paige, I said. I didn't need to see the caller ID. I think your wife has questions. Derek stared at the phone like it might bite him. It rang again. And again. He answered it in the doorway, his back to us, his voice low. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the tone. Paige wasn't asking. She was demanding. Cora stood beside me, her phone still in her hand. Dorothy gathered her notary supplies. Linnea was already texting, probably updating the filing she would submit within the hour. And Derek Hollister, my 42-year-old son who had come to my birthday party planning to steal everything I owned, stood in my driveway with a phone pressed to his ear and his entire world collapsing around him. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. 40 years of patience. And this was where it led. Watching my son learn that the women he'd underestimated had been the only ones paying attention. I watched from my kitchen window as Derek's Mercedes tore out of my driveway, Paige's voice still crackling through his phone. Whatever she was saying, it had stripped the last of his composure. I learned later what he found when he got home. The garage door opened to Paige's empty parking space. Her Range Rover was gone. Derek knew before he reached the elevator, but he went up anyway. The way you press a bruise, just to confirm it hurts. The condo was silent. Half the closet stood empty, hangers swinging in the draft from the air conditioning. Her jewelry box was cleared. The bathroom counter, usually covered with creams and serums whose names Derek couldn't pronounce, was bare marble. On the kitchen island, a single sheet of paper in Paige's careful handwriting. I heard you say she thinks you're helping. I was the one you were hiding it from. The note continued she had opened her own bank account on Tuesday, but according moved funds that morning, and her lawyer would contact him on Monday. At the bottom, in smaller letters, my lawyer's name is on the back. Don't call me. 11 years of marriage fit into 2 suitcases. Derek counted the empty hangers like a man counting wounds. He had lost his mother and his wife in the same morning, and he hadn't even seen it coming. I didn't know any of this at the time. I was in my kitchen, watching the construction cranes move across the horizon, waiting for the next piece to fall. It fell at noon. My phone rang. Not Linnea's number, not Derek's. A Phoenix area code I didn't recognize. Mrs. Hollister? The voice was professional, clipped. This is Victoria Marsh, VP of Legal for Apex Development Corporation. I set down my tea. How did you get this number? Your attorney provided it. Mrs. Hollister, we understand there's been a miscommunication regarding the Sunrise Ridge project. A pause. We'd like to negotiate directly. How do you explain to a corporation that the son they trusted to deliver the land was never authorized to promise it? That the permits they filed were built on assumptions nobody bothered to verify? That the woman they'd dismissed as Derek's aging mother was the actual owner of everything they thought they were buying? You don't explain. You let them come to you. What exactly would you like to negotiate, Ms. Marsh? The lien your LLC filed on the parcels. Our title company flagged it this morning. Without a release, the deal cannot close. Another pause. We have investors who expect results by 5 p.m. today. Whatever Derek promised you, we can discuss alternatives. Alternatives. Compensation. A buyout of your interest. Something that works for everyone. I looked out the window. The cranes had stopped moving. Workers in hard hats stood idle on ground I had owned since before Derek learned what a permit was. I'll have an answer for you by 4 o'clock, I said. Not before. Mrs. Hollister. 4 o'clock. Ms. Marsh, you've waited 2 years to discover who actually owns that land. You can wait 4 more hours. I ended the call and immediately dialed Linnea. They called me, I said. Apex, directly. Linnea laughed. A short, sharp sound of victory. They're panicking. Derek must have told them about the counter POA. They want to negotiate. Buyout, compensation, whatever I want. What do you want, Auntie? I looked at the documents spread across my kitchen table. The counter POA with Dorothy's notary stamp. Cora's phone with 2 days of recordings. Vernon's sealed letter, still unopened since Derek left. I want to hear what Vernon wrote, I said. Then I'll decide. Vernon always said the patient hunter eats. That Friday afternoon, I finally understood what he meant. Not that patience guarantees victory, but that patience gives you choices. I could destroy Derek completely. Let the lien stand. Watch Apex pull out and his development collapse. Let him lose his company, his reputation, his wife, everything he had built on ground he never owned. Or I could offer something else. I hung up with Linnea and looked at the kitchen clock. 4 hours until my deadline. 4 hours to decide whether to crush my son entirely or offer him something he didn't deserve. The joint venture proposal Linnea had drafted sat on the table. A partnership structure that would give me 35% equity, a board seat, and approval rights over all land decisions. Derek would keep his title, keep his job, but work under my authority. Justice without destruction. Accountability without annihilation. Vernon's letter sat beside it. The envelope was still sealed. His handwriting faded, but unmistakable. He had written this knowing Derek would betray me. He had written this knowing I would need guidance. I picked up the envelope and ran my finger along the seal. My husband had always known what our son would become. Had he also known what I should do about it? Cora appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her school uniform. Ba? Are you okay? I'm deciding something. Con. I set the envelope down. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't winning. It's deciding what to do after you've already won. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe 16 was old enough to know that mercy and weakness are not the same thing. The decision sat in my chest like a stone. Destroy him or save him. Justice or mercy. I had 2 hours to choose. Then Derek's Mercedes pulled into my driveway, and the choice became something more complicated than either. When did my son stop being the boy who brought me dandelions and start being the man who wanted to steal my land? I watched him climb out of the car, and for a moment, I couldn't find the answer. He moved slowly, all the urgency of this morning stripped away. His suit was wrinkled, his shoes dusty. He looked like a man who had driven in circles before finding the courage to come here. He stopped at the bottom of my porch steps, didn't climb them, didn't knock. Mom, I stood at the screen door, watching, waiting. I was trying to help you. His voice cracked on the word. You don't understand business. I was trying to make sure you'd be taken care of. By taking everything I own. By managing it. For the family. He ran a hand through his hair, and I saw the trimmer in his fingers. Dad would have wanted the family to benefit. All of us. Not just you sitting on land you don't even use. He was 8 when he stopped hugging me in public. Said the other kids thought it was weird that he still held his mother's hand. 42 when he stopped pretending he ever would again. I had watched him grow away from me, one small rejection at a time, and I had smiled through every one. Paige left. Derek's voice dropped. Did you know that? She took her things and left. 11 years. Gone because of this. Because of what you did. Because of what you made me do. The accusation burst out of him, raw and desperate. You could have just signed the papers. It would have been simple. Everyone would have won. Everyone except me. You would have been protected, cared for. I was going to make sure. You were going to make sure I had nothing left to protect myself with. I kept my voice level. You were going to take my company, my land, my choices, and you were going to call it love. Derek stared at me. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch, and in that light, I could see the gray appearing at his temples. When had my son started going gray? You turned Cora against me, he said quietly. My own niece. Cora made her own choice. She's 16. You gave her a phone and told her to record me. I gave her a way to remember the truth. What she did with it was up to her. Watching Derek cycle through his excuses was like watching a drowning man grab at water. The harder he tried, the faster he sank. Explanation, justification, accusation, and now, finally, something that looked almost like honesty. What do you want from me? His voice broke completely. The deal's dead. Paige is gone. My lawyer won't return my calls. What else do you want? What do you think I want, Derek? I don't know. He threw his hands up. An apology, fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I tried to help you in a way you didn't want. I'm sorry I thought I knew better. I'm sorry for all of it. The apology hung in the air between us. It was the apology of a man who still didn't understand what he'd done. But it was also something else. It was the sound of my son, stripped of everything, standing on my porch with nowhere else to go. You want to know the cruelest thing about loving your children? You remember every version of them at once. The infant who fell asleep on your chest. The toddler who cried when you left the room. The teenager who rolled his eyes at everything you said. The man who decided you were an obstacle to be managed. I saw all of them standing on my porch, and I couldn't separate the man I wanted to punish from the boy I had sworn to protect. Come inside, I said. Derek looked up. Confusion crossed his face. I didn't say I forgive you. I pushed open the screen door, feeling the warm metal under my palm. But there's something you need to see. What is it? Your father left you something. A letter. He wrote it before he died, and he asked me to give it to you when the time was right. Derek didn't move. He stood at the bottom of the steps like a man afraid to enter a house he'd grown up in. He stopped, started again. What did he say? I don't know. I never opened it. I held the door wider. But I think he knew. Derek, I think he knew what you would become. And he wrote something anyway. For a moment, Derek hesitated, the same way he'd hesitated at 5 years old when I caught him lying about broken cookies. The same way he'd hesitated at 12 when he asked if he could change his last name to sound less Vietnamese. Come in, I said again. Your father has something to tell you, and I think it's time you finally listened. Derek followed me inside like a man walking to his own sentencing. I led him to the kitchen table where the envelope waited, yellowed with age. His name written across the front in his father's careful hand. The envelope had been sealed for 17 years. Derek's hands shook as he turned it over. Your father wrote this 3 months before he died, I said. He asked me to give it to you when you needed it most. Derek stared at the envelope. Vernon Hollister had been dead for 15 years, but his handwriting on that yellowed paper made him present in that kitchen as surely as if he'd pulled up a chair. Derek broke the seal. Inside, a single sheet of paper covered in Vietnamese characters, Vernon's language. The one Derek had refused to learn properly. The one he'd told his teachers was too hard, and his friends was unnecessary. I can't, Derek's voice caught. I can't read this. I can. He slid the letter across the table. I picked it up and read my husband's words aloud, translating as I went. Contrai, my son. If you are reading this, you have done what I feared. Your mother will decide what happens next. Derek's face went pale. I could have locked you out. I continued reading. I could have structured everything so you would never have a chance to take it. But that would have meant giving up on you. I chose to give your mother the choice instead. That is my final gift to both of you. Derek read his father's Vietnamese slowly, tracing the characters with his finger, stumbling over words he should have learned decades ago. And I wondered if that was the real betrayal, not the land, not the money, but the language he'd thrown away because it made him different. He knew. Derek's voice was barely a whisper. All this time, he knew what I would become. He hoped he was wrong, but he prepared for being right. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the table between us. Vernon always said you had his ambition, but not his patience. He worried what that would mean. The kitchen was silent, except for the clock on the wall. 2:30. An hour and a half until my deadline with Apex. A car pulled into the driveway. Linnea's sedan. She walked in carrying a folder, her heels clicking on the tile floor. She set the folder on the table without greeting either of us. The joint venture agreement, she said, drafted this morning. Derek looked up. Joint venture. What do you do when your dead husband gives you permission to forgive the son who wronged you both? Vernon had seen what Derek would become and chose not to stop it. He had trusted me to handle it my own way. I could destroy Derek. I had the power now. But Vernon hadn't given me that power to use for destruction. Here's what happens next, I said. Apex needs the lien released by 4 o'clock or the deal collapses. I'm willing to release it, but the terms change. Derek's eyes narrowed. What terms? Linnea opened the folder. 35% equity stake in the development, transferred to your mother's LLC. Board seat with veto power over all land decisions. And you stay on as project manager. Project manager. Derek's voice was flat. I created this project. And you tried to steal the land under it, Linnea replied. This is the alternative to criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. I leaned forward. You can still work. You can still earn. But you work for me now. And if I refuse, then the lien stays. Apex pulls out, your investors sue you for breach of contract. I kept my voice steady. You lose everything anyway, and you get nothing in return. I wasn't offering Derek a lifeline. I was offering him a leash, and I was letting him decide if wearing it was better than drowning. Derek stared at the agreement. His father's letter sat beside it. 2 documents from 2 generations, both asking him to make a choice. This isn't mercy, he said quietly. This is humiliation. This is accountability. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the construction cranes on the horizon. The difference between punishment and consequence is what you do with it. The clock read 3:47. 13 minutes until I had to call Apex. I need to know, Derek said, his voice cracking. Will you ever forgive me? I turned to face him, my 42-year-old son, sitting at the table where he'd eaten breakfast as a child, where he'd done homework and complained about vegetables and asked me questions about the world. The same son who had come to my birthday party with papers designed to strip me of everything. I don't know yet, I said, but I'm giving you time to earn it. Derek picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line. Your father believed in you, I added. Even when he knew what you might do, he believed you could be better. And you. I'm your mother. I returned to the table and sat across from him. I believe in who you used to be. I'm hoping you can find your way back to him. Derek signed the agreement at 3:52. His signature was smaller than usual, pressed into the paper like something he wanted to hide. By 4 o'clock, we stood at the Sunrise Ridge construction site, watching workers unbolt the old project sign. The crane swung the old sign down like it weighed nothing. 4 years of Derek's name erased in 30 seconds. Hollister Development Group, painted in bold letters that had meant everything to my son, lowered to the ground and set aside like yesterday's newspaper. The new sign was already waiting on the flatbed truck. Workers hoisted it into place, bolting it to the steel frame with practiced efficiency. When they stepped back, the afternoon sun caught the fresh paint. Sunrise Ridge, a joint development of Apex Corp. And Lotus Land Holdings, LLC. Derek stared at his mother's company name rising on steel beams he had thought were his alone. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. You've been watching this whole time, he said finally. Watching. Permitting. Waiting. Linnea stood beside me, her briefcase full of documents that had just been filed with the county recorder. The LLC has held mineral rights since 2009. Your father registered it before the first survey was even completed. Derek had spent 4 years building a tower on a foundation he didn't own and calling himself the architect. Every permit he'd filed had crossed my desk. Every approval had required my signature, routed through holding companies and trust structures that nobody thought to question. Every permit, Derek repeated, understanding dawning. You approved every single one. I wanted to see what you would build. I watched the workers secure the final bolt on the new sign. I just didn't know you would try to steal it. We drove to Apex headquarters in separate cars. The conference room on the 12th floor was already set up when we arrived. Victoria Marsh, the VP of Legal who had called me that morning, along with 3 executives I didn't recognize, and a paralegal taking notes in the corner. They offered champagne. I declined. This was not a celebration. The joint venture agreement sat in the center of the table, already bearing Derek's signature from my kitchen. Now it needed mine, and Apex's, to become final. I picked up the pen and signed my full Vietnamese name, the one I never used in public, the one Derek couldn't read. May Thi Nguyen Hollister, spelled in the careful characters Vernon had taught me to write during our first year in America. You want to know what patience looks like? 17 years of watching your son take credit for your husband's vision. 17 years of staying silent while Derek built his reputation on ground that was never his to build on. The Apex executives signed, the paralegal collected the documents, and just like that, the deal closed on my terms. I reached into my purse and pulled out a photograph. Faded now, the colors muted by time, but the image clear enough. I slid it across the table to Derek. Vernon and I stood before a for sale sign on empty scrubland. The sign read, 47 acres, motivated sellin'. Vernon smiled at the camera, his arm around my shoulders. I held the deposit check in my hand, already signed. 2009, I said, 3 months before you closed your first real estate deal. Derek picked up the photograph. His hands trembled. Your father found this land, I continued. I bought it. You developed it. Now we share it. I didn't know, his voice cracked, any of it. That's the difference between us. I took the photograph back, tucking it into my purse. I always knew everything. Vernon's smile in that photograph hadn't aged. Neither had his faith that I would handle this exactly right. He had trusted me to protect his vision, to guard our investment, to manage the son who had inherited his ambition but not his honor. We walked out of Apex headquarters into the late afternoon sun. The parking garage was nearly empty. Executives gone home for the weekend. The building settling into its Friday quiet. Derek stopped at his car. His keys were in his hand, but he didn't open the door. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," he said. I waited. About Cora's college fund. He couldn't meet my eyes. About what I was really going to do with it. The parking garage was silent. Somewhere above us, a car engine started. A security guard walked past without looking at us. "I was going to redirect it," Derek said quietly, "through a holding company. Make it look like market losses. Use the money to cover my buy-in with Apex. My granddaughter's college fund. The money her mother had set aside since Cora was born. Derek had been planning to steal from his own niece. The POA, I said slowly, Clause 7.3, would have given me access to everything. He still couldn't look at me. Including the trust you set up for her education. Some confessions only come when a man has nothing left to protect. Derek had lost his deal, his wife, and his dignity. Now he was offering the last thing he had. The truth. I stood in that parking garage and listened to my son confess what he had planned to do to his own niece. The money her mother had saved since birth. The trust I had helped establish. Derek had been willing to steal it all and blame the market. I told him to go home. I told him I needed time. 6 weeks passed before I heard from him again. 6 weeks of silence. And then his name lit up my phone like a question I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. December had turned the desert cold, and I stood in my kitchen watching my coffee go lukewarm while the phone rang. I answered on the 4th ring. "Mom?" His voice was different, quieter, the confidence stripped away. "I'm not asking for forgiveness." "Then what are you asking for?" A long pause. I could hear traffic in the background, the sound of someone honking. "Work," he said finally. "I'm asking for work." "You have work, the joint venture, not as project manager, not overseeing anything." Another pause. "I want to work on the site, actually build something. Start at the bottom, the way Dad did when he first came here." How many mothers wait their whole lives for a phone call like that? How many mothers pray their children will finally understand what they threw away? Finally choose humility over pride. And how many mothers never receive that call at all? "There's an application process," I said. "Submit your resume like everyone else." "I will," his voice cracked. "I just needed you to know I'm serious this time. I need to build something right for once in my life." I didn't promise him anything. I didn't tell him I was proud of him for calling. The words would have been lies, and we had both told enough of those. "We'll see," I said, and ended the call. That afternoon, I drove to the Sunrise Ridge construction site. The community center foundation was being poured. Concrete trucks lined up along the access road. Workers in hard hats moved across the site like ants, building something bigger than themselves. Derek was waiting at the gate. He wore work boots instead of Italian loafers, jeans instead of tailored trousers, a jacket from a hardware store instead of a designer label. His hands were shoved in his pockets, and he looked cold. Derek in work boots looked like a man wearing someone else's shoes, but somehow they fit better than the Italian leather ever had. "You came," I said. "I submitted the application this morning, online, like everyone else." He pulled his hands from his pockets. "I know you'll probably reject it. I just wanted to be here, to see what you're building." The construction site stretched before us, steel beams rising against the winter sky. The project sign still bore both names, Apex Corp. And Lotus Land Holdings, LLC. My name, visible now to everyone who passed. "The community center was my addition," I said. "The investors wanted more retail space. I insisted on something that would actually help people." Derek nodded slowly. Dad would have liked that. Yes, he would have. We stood in silence, watching the workers move. A crane lifted a steel beam into position, and the sound of welding echoed across the site. "May I walk in with you?" Derek asked quietly. I looked at my son, 42 years old, standing at a gate he used to stride through like he owned everything beyond it. Now he was asking permission. Now he understood that permission had to be earned. "You may." We walked through the gate together. No embrace, no dramatic apology, just two people moving in the same direction for the first time in years. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, we just walked. And sometimes that's enough. The concrete pour continued around us. Workers glanced up as we passed, recognizing me, uncertain about the man beside me. I didn't explain. Derek didn't expect me to. We stopped near the community center foundation. The forms were set, the rebar cage visible, everything ready for the concrete that would make it permanent. Derek pointed to a beam being lifted into place by the crane, swinging slowly against the gray December sky. "That one," he said quietly. "That's the one I want to work on first." I followed his gaze. The beam would become part of the community center's main hall, the gathering space where families would hold events, where seniors would take classes, where children would learn things their parents couldn't teach them. The part of the project I had insisted on adding. "Why that one?" I asked. "Because it matters." He turned to face me. "I spent 4 years building things that would make money. I want to build something that matters instead." I didn't tell him I forgave him. I wasn't sure yet if I did. But I watched my son stand in the cold December air, asking to work with his hands on a beam that would hold a community center. And I thought, maybe this is where it starts. Maybe this is how you find your way back. I watched the crane lower the beam into place, Derek's eyes following it with something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine interest in something beyond himself. Maybe this was the beginning. Maybe it wasn't. Time would tell. A week later, a different kind of beginning found me. The woman who had avoided me for 12 years was asking if she could buy me coffee, and I almost said no. Paige's text had arrived that morning. "Can we meet? Same coffee shop, please." The same booth where Derek had pressured me to sign documents just weeks ago. The same place where I had asked her about separate bank accounts. Planting a seed I didn't know was already growing. I agreed. I'm not sure why. Maybe because she said please. Desert Bloom Coffee House was quiet on a Tuesday afternoon. Paige sat in the booth with her hands wrapped around a peppermint latte. Her coral manicure chipped now. Her hair pulled back without the usual careful styling. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You said please." I sat across from her. That's more than Derek ever managed. She flinched, but she didn't look away. "I believed everything he told me about you," her voice cracked. "I'm ashamed it took losing him to see you clearly." "Do you want to apologize?" I asked. "Or do you want to talk?" "Both." She met my eyes. "If you'll let me." 2 hours. We talked for 2 hours, more than we'd spoken in 12 years of family dinners combined. Paige told me about the phone call she'd overheard, the screenshots she'd taken, the divorce attorney she'd contacted at 2 in the morning. She told me she hadn't known what Derek was planning, but she'd known something was wrong. She'd just been too afraid to look. "I should have looked," she said, years ago. Fear makes cowards of everyone. I finished my cold coffee, even the people we love. "Do you think he can change?" Paige asked. "Really change?" "I think he wants to." I set down the empty cup. Whether wanting is enough, I don't know yet. We left the coffee shop with something we'd never had before. Honesty. Paige had been deceived by the same man who had deceived me. We were both casualties of Derek's ambition. And maybe, in some strange way, we were both survivors. That evening, I returned home to find an envelope from Apex Development waiting in my mailbox. Inside a check for $287,000, the first quarterly distribution from my equity stake. My name printed clearly on the payee line. That check was heavier than the paper it was printed on. 40 years of patience, reduced to 6 digits and a signature. Proof that Vernon's foresight and my vigilance had built something real. Cora was doing homework at the kitchen table when I came inside. "Grandma!" She looked up from her chemistry textbook. "What's that?" I set the check on the table between us. An equity distribution from the development project. Cora's eyes widened. "That's almost $300,000. Shouldn't it go to a bank? It will. I walked to the kitchen counter and opened the bottom drawer, the one that held Vernon's letters. The original deed. The photographs from before Derek was born. But first, I want you to see where it lives, in the same drawer as your grandfather's letters. I placed the check carefully on top of the papers. Cora stood beside me watching. Money is proof. Cora. I closed the drawer slowly. Proof that someone kept their word. Proof that work was done right. Never confuse the proof with the promise. What do you mean? I mean the check isn't the victory. I turned to face her. The check is evidence that Vernon and I built something together. The real victory was the building, the planning, the patience. Cora looked at the drawer, then back at me. Is that why you keep Grandpa's letters in there? Letters are proof too. I touched the worn wood of the drawer. Proof that someone loved you. Proof that they saw the future and tried to protect you from it. Cora will remember that drawer. I made sure of it. Some lessons don't fit in a classroom. Some lessons have to be shown. Held. Placed carefully in a drawer that smells like old paper and jasmine. She watched as I pushed the drawer closed, the click of the latch soft in the quiet kitchen. Grandma, she said quietly, what else is in there? I smiled. This was the question I had been waiting for. You'll find out, I said, but not until you're ready to understand that some things are worth more than money. When will that be? When you can answer the question yourself. Cora looked at the drawer for a long moment. Then she nodded. The way she did when she was filing something away for later. I'll figure it out, she said. I know you will. I touched her shoulder. Your grandfather believed in you. So do I. The kitchen window showed the construction lights blinking on the horizon. The project that had almost destroyed my family was becoming something else now. Something that might heal instead of harm. And in my bottom drawer, proof of both sat side by side. Cora would figure it out. She had her grandfather's patience and her grandmother's eyes. She would learn what was in that drawer when she was ready to understand what it meant. But that night, she slept in the guest room, while I sat alone in my kitchen, watching the final hours of the year slip away. The house was quiet. Cora asleep down the hall. The construction lights blinking through my window like stars that never moved. And for the first time in 54 years, I had no one left to prove anything to. New Year's Eve, 11:50 at night. The clock on my wall ticked toward midnight, and I sat at the table where Vernon and I had eaten breakfast every morning for 30 years. The table where I had fed Derek as a baby, helped him with homework, watched him grow into someone I didn't recognize. The same table where just weeks ago I had signed documents that changed everything. I opened the bottom drawer one final time. The papers were layered like sediment. Land records from 2009. Vernon's letter in Vietnamese. The equity check I'd placed there days ago. And now, on top a reservation slip from Apex Development Corporation. Unit 1A. Corner unit, facing east. Move-in date, September 2026. That drawer held 40 years of patience folded into paper. Most people keep their trophies on shelves. I kept mine where they belonged, in the dark, doing their work. The reservation slip was the last piece. I had secured my own apartment in the building before Derek drew his first blueprint, before the permits were filed, before anyone knew that the woman who owned the land was also planning to live on it. I wasn't leaving this place I had built with Vernon, but I was making room for what came next. The construction lights blinked through the window. My building, my land, my legacy rising against the desert sky. I looked at Vernon's photograph on the windowsill. The same smile I had fallen in love with 40 years ago. The same quiet confidence that had taught me everything I knew about patience. An ơi, I whispered in the language we had spoken when no one else could understand. Em làm rồi, my love. I did it. Vernon would have laughed at Unit 1A. He always said I would outlive everyone who underestimated me. He just didn't know I would outlive him too. I closed the drawer slowly, feeling the familiar click of the latch. Then I stood and walked to the corner of the kitchen, where the sewing machine still sat on its old table. The same machine I had brought from our first apartment. The same machine that had made curtains and hemmed trousers and mended everything my family tore. I ran my hand over the cool metal. The wheel turned slightly under my touch, smooth from years of use. This machine had been my cover, my disguise. The reason no one ever looked twice at a woman who spent her days pushing fabric through a needle. But while they weren't looking, I was learning, reading, planning, building something none of them could see. If you've listened this long, you already know the lesson. The quietest person in the room isn't always the weakest. Sometimes she's just waiting for everyone else to talk themselves into a trap. The clock on the wall showed 11:58, 2 minutes until midnight, 2 minutes until a new year. I thought about Derek, somewhere in the city, working on a building he no longer owned. I thought about Paige, rebuilding her life in a condo she had bought with her own money. I thought about Cora, asleep in my guest room, learning lessons that would take years to fully understand. I thought about Vernon, 15 years gone, still protecting me from beyond the grave. And I thought about myself, 68 years old, immigrant, widow, mother of a son who had tried to steal everything I had, owner of land worth more than my son ever imagined. The clock struck midnight, through the window. The construction lights flickered once and held steady. A building rising on land I had bought, when my son still called me Mom without wanting something in return. Steel and concrete and glass, becoming something real. In the distance, fireworks began to crack and bloom over Phoenix. The new year arriving the way it always did, loud and bright and impossible to ignore. I touched the sewing machine one more time. Then I smiled. 68 years old, $300,000 in my drawer, 35% equity in a development that would change this neighborhood, an apartment waiting for me in a building that bore my company's name, and a granddaughter who would inherit all of it when she learned what it meant. I whispered the truth I had carried for 40 years, the truth that had protected me when no one else could, the truth that had built an empire while everyone looked the other way. Nobody looks twice at a quiet woman with a sewing machine. The fireworks painted the sky in colors I couldn't name. The construction lights kept blinking, and somewhere in the desert night, a building kept rising. I was just getting started. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Looking back on everything that happened, I sometimes wonder if I could have prevented this. Maybe if I had been more honest with Derek about the land from the start. Maybe if I had talked to him instead of waiting and watching. But you cannot change someone who does not want to change. You can only protect yourself and the ones you love. That was my hardest lesson. If this revenge story taught me anything, it's that patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. The quietest person in the room is sometimes the one holding all the cards. I believe God put me through those 40 years of quiet for a reason, to learn, to prepare, to protect what truly matters. Not every grand drama story ends in destruction. Some end in second chances. Derek is working on that community center now. Maybe that's where his redemption begins. This revenge story was never about winning. It was about protecting what Vernon and I built together. It was about showing Cora that strength doesn't always look the way people expect it to. I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, was I too harsh on my son? Or not harsh enough? Would you have given Derek a second chance? If this grand drama story spoke to you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss my next revenge story. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means more than you know. Please remember, some details in this story have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental. What matters most is the lesson we carry forward.